the Donald appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast.
I know, it was great as well, wasn't it?
Podcast all day, train by night. No, that's the wrong way around. All day. So yeah, the Donald was on there, and Trump is actually a big fan of MMA, right? I've seen him at MMA events loads of times. Well, he likes wrestling as well, doesn't he? He's a true American. So he finally went on Joe Rogan, and I listened to it all. I think you listened to it all as well.
I did indeed, yeah.
It was quite entertaining. It's probably worth listening to, but if you haven't got the time, so it's 3 hours long. We'll just talk about it a bit here. And there was a few interesting tidbits in there. No massive new sort of policy announcements or anything. No massive new secrets about what Trump intends to do or anything. But still, it's quite interesting. I think it's worth a watch.
Would I be able to give my sort of general thoughts on it?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, cool.
So the first thing is that the format really lent itself quite well to Trump, because he was talking about the weave, wasn't he, quite a lot. And he was saying how he tells a story and he weaves it into a grander narrative, and he's just like, not very many people do the weave. The best I can do, I'm afraid.
No, it's right. He can talk off the cuff in a long form way,
And-
like a normal human being.
And in a very entertaining way as well.
Yeah.
And he just came across as very interesting and very personable and likable in a way that most politicians don't. And, you know, obviously he's a seasoned TV man at this point. So he's got a bit of TV sense to him.
And you know, he's lived a life. He's been round the block. He could go on Larry King or something decades ago and just talk off the cuff for a long time. So this is bread and butter.
So while we're sort of talking about it, I also saw JD Vance go on Theo Vaughan's show recently as well, because they sort of did the podcasting sphere in the run-up, didn't they? And JD Vance came across as like the most normal guy ever. There's a point where they were talking about American football, and I was just like, this just sounds like two men at like a barbecue having chit-chat. I was just like, this is really weird that he's, you know, potentially going to be the vice president, and he's talking like such a normal guy, and it comes across as so much more likable.
And maybe the commander-in-chief himself in 4 years' time.
That's true, yeah. It does seem to be that he's being courted for that role, doesn't it?
It's not unheard of for VPs, yeah. I think also it was a really funny interview at times. I don't want to anticipate, but are you going to talk about the segment where he's talking about landing in Middle East somewhere at night?
Yeah, could do. Yeah,
Okay,
there's loads of things
I'll
to talk
keep
about.
it
But
for
no,
that.
go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
it's just funny because, I mean, he said that they had all the lights turned off at Air Force One, and he was a bit grumpy. He was saying, we're paying trillions of dollars. Why can't we have the lights up? Which it's a bit endearing, because on the one hand, it's like a spoiled child, but you can't be mad at him
Right,
at the same time. It's just so funny.
Yeah, we've spent, what is it, like $8 trillion. It's been 20 years, and we still have to land without our lights on because we might get attacked
Yeah,
with
but
anti-aircraft weapons.
if we're in an undercover mission, presumably you don't want to be seen.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I just thought it was interesting because he comes across as, well, who he is. That is the thing about Trump. Like him or loathe him, what you see is what you get.
That's
And I think,
part of his appeal, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
right.
why he's so popular, is that you know he's not a career politician because he's not giving these well-rehearsed answers, and that's why when he said something controversial, it made him more popular.
And it is that thing that I think Joe Rogan said explicitly this at one point, and I completely agree with him, that people are just sick of the professional career politician having a sort of line, a political line, a party line, which they stick to rigidly. There's so many examples of that. When they're asked a question and they give an evasive politician's answer, they're asked the question again and they just repeat the exact same line again and again. And it's a disingenuous answer in the first place. People are sick of that. We don't want that anymore, right? It's not 1960s Soviet era. Just be a normal person. And if you actually can't answer it for a proper political reason, you can say that as well. I mean, Trump did that once or twice. When Joe Rogan said, "No, what exactly would you say to Putin and Zelensky?" And he said, "Oh, I can't tell you that because then the deal wouldn't necessarily work. And I'm not going to tell you that, but I've got a reason for it. However, da-da-da-da-da." Like, that's okay. Or if there's something to do with national security, you say, well, it is actually a national security thing, so I can't tell you that. But otherwise, and you carry on being a normal, fluid human being, I think that's what people want above all else.
After the roaring success of our UK election coverage, we are indeed doing another massive Lotus Eaters livestream to cover the US elections on Tuesday, the 5th of November. We will have a giant roster of guests, both in the studio and remotely via Zoom, and we will be live streaming on Rumble, so we'll be able to say exactly what we think, no holds barred. Do tune in, it's going to be great, and hopefully we'll be ringing in Trump's second term, or perhaps we'll be having a massive meltdown. Who knows what the future holds. See you then.
I know, that's what I want. I hate it when you see some would-be politician. I don't know why Angela Rayner popped into my mind, but someone like that, where they the interviewer tries to put them under pressure and they just say the same nonsense line over and over again. Or Kamala does it all the time. Because they've got nothing else. Because they're a weird cutout of a person.
It's like being brainwashed.
Yeah.
And we're so much attacked by this ideology and culture wars that you're supposed to say this, you're supposed to say that. And if you deviate from these lines in any way, you're just going to be destroyed. People are tired of this.
Again, like being a Soviet-era diplomat. There's the one thing you're allowed to say, and if you deviate even a word from that, then you're in trouble. No?
Well, a lot of politicians, they're just bodies to occupy space for other interests, really, aren't they? They're not really there to actually speak their mind a lot of the time. A lot of political systems in Europe and North America and elsewhere are sort of set up with that in mind these days.
So funny, something just came to my mind. I hadn't planned to say it, but with Formula One drivers, it used to be the case when I was a kid, back in the 80s and even the early 90s a bit. They would always do that. It's a party line. They'll say, your car wasn't very good today, you seem to struggle with grip, and they'd always say, the car is great, the team is brilliant, and like they'd do that. And at some point in the late 90s or in the 2000s, they just became honest. They said, yeah, it was really bad, we've got loads of work to do, I'm really disappointed we weren't able to. Nowadays, F1 drivers are really honest. Like immediately after the race, they'll say, yeah, we struggled with this or that. And it never used to be the case. They used to always have like a party line. They'll be like a bit of a robot. Everything's fine. Like, everything's not fine, right? I think that's what people want with their politicians now. Mm-hmm. Like just be a human, be honest and be normal.
Well, yeah, people can tell when they're being lied to, can't they?
Yeah. Even little kids can tell nearly always when they're being bullshitted, basically. Okay, so let's talk about what was in it a bit. If I run through some of the less interesting things, because I think towards the end of the interview they got into things I found more interesting. So they talked a bit about The View. They started off talking about The View, where before 2016, they loved him and they'd have him on all the time, and he was like their funny New York sort of right-ish leaning guy, and they would always have him on because he was a Democrat back then. He was sort of a fairly vocal Democrat for most of his adult life. Joe asked him about what it was like to be president. What's it like? I thought that was quite interesting to, go to the White House for the first time. And Trump said it was surreal. He found it surreal, sort of going to the Lincoln bedroom. And the Lincoln bed, it was literally Lincoln's bed, he's still there and stuff. And he said it was sort of surreal, which is interesting. But like, you get used to it, like almost anything else. Whether it's being president of the United States or having to get used to solitary confinement in a jail. Eventually you get used to it, whatever it is.
That struck me actually, because that made me think while he was saying it. Like, he has such reverence for the history of it, because he's talking about Lincoln's bedroom for ages and how tall it was and all the history that's gone on there. And then he just says, yeah, but then eventually you get used to it. And that sort of makes you think, okay, yeah, well, he's being honest. If it were someone else, they would say, oh yeah, it was amazing, I'm so grateful for it, and then they'd just leave it. They wouldn't say you get used to it. But that's showing a genuine attempt to actually reflect reality rather than pursue what is in your short-term self-interest.
It's true though, most people must know it in their own lives. There's something you think you would never be doing or you wouldn't ever achieve, and once you do, it's just suddenly commonplace.
Podcasting.
Right, yeah.
I never thought I'd be doing this.
Yeah. No, I've had it a few times in my life, sort of. Yeah, like one time when I started working at a big company, or JP Morgan, I thought, wow, those guys are something different. Like they're a cut above. They've made it in the city. They're JP Morgan employees that deal with funds and stuff. Wow, and then within a few weeks, it's just nothing. Mm-hmm. It's just nothing. Or making a bit of money, or whatever it is. Or when I first went to because I came from a very working class London background, I never really dreamed I'd go to a really great university and read classics. And when I did, for a little while, I was like a little bit awestruck. But very quickly, oh yeah, it's nothing actually. It's just normal. It's just what it is. Even with being president, apparently that's the case. It's interesting to know. Anyway, moving on. I do find Trump entertaining, like his patterns of speech and what he says. He mentioned at one point that Washington DC is a terrible place, and it is. I think when you look at the crime statistics in Washington DC, it's pretty bad. I think it was even worse back in the 90s, but it's still pretty violent city.
I know that Connor said that when he was last there, he went to a coffee shop and there was an urban scholar spreading his scholarly word to the people working there.
Right.
Basically abusing the staff.
I think like a lot of cities, there'll be nice places and then there's the horrible bits. But Trump just said he's going to bring Washington back. He's going to make it great again. So Joe asked him about how difficult it is to appoint people. Because that was one of the criticisms, even one of the criticisms I had of Trump in the 2016 to 20 period was that he appointed a few duff calls. And Trump said it's actually quite hard because there's a reason why people that get appointed over and over again is because they've got the experience, they know what they're doing, and they've already been vetted. So you pick someone that you think's great and you think you know all about them, but then the media point out that actually they did something really bad in their past and you never even knew about it. And yet you've already appointed them to some senior position. And the way to get around that is someone that's been in the game for 30 years already, but the media have already trawled over their past. And so they're sort of a safe pick.
Vetting's quite a slow and expensive process as well. So you can... Yeah. I did think it was interesting that he pointed that out because it was basically quite an acceptable reason why he did what he did. Because he did pick some quite establishment people in his first time as president.
But also what I think we need to bear in mind is that when he is in the, let's say, the top officer of the US, you have a massive portfolio. You can't be taking all the decisions yourself. When you're in these positions, you have to outsource decision making to other people. You can't. You have to do it. Yeah. So at the end of the day, you have to rest on other people and depend upon them.
Yeah, as chief magistrate in the very early days.
Mistakes are always made. Yeah.
So, for example, we picked John Bolton, and it's funny, they've fallen out massively since. John Bolton just calls him really, really stupid. He's got like an empty mind and stuff. And Trump called him a nut job, a whack job. Thought that was quite funny.
It was.
And it reminds me of, there was one point where someone said to Lincoln that there's lots and lots of people asking for positions. There's far too many people asking for positions compared to how many there are to give out. And Lincoln said, "There's too many pigs for the tits." I think that's a great quote. I love that quote of President Lincoln. And Trump didn't say that, but that's a perennial thing. If you're the head of government, there will always be loads more people insisting you give them a job than there are to give out. That's the nature of it. But yeah, Joe said straight to Trump's face that you said some wild shit, freeballing. And Trump just was laughing and smiling. It's like, that's how I roll.
I did think that Joe was... It's just like, you've got a former president on here, and Joe was like cutting him off and finishing his sentences. And I was like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I was quite surprised. I thought Joe would be a bit more reserved. I suppose he felt like he had to keep a little bit of control because it is a politician at the end of the day, and you don't want them taking over your show, so to speak, and making you look weak. So that's what I sort of explained it.
Also, it's just a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. It was just a conversation. And Joe Rogan, is pretty... I mean, if I was to call him impartial, might not be quite right, but just give someone the chance to speak and just have a conversation with them. That's what he said. If he ever got Kamala on, he wouldn't just be teeing her up for her answers. He'd try and have a conversation with her. And I think that's what it was. But yeah, he did cut him off a couple of times, which... but hey, Joe Rogan's the biggest in the game, right? I think Trump probably, in this small window of time, when we're only a few days out, Trump needs Joe more than Joe needs Trump right now.
That's probably
right?
true. Yeah.
So
imagine saying that though, just like, I cut off a former president in a conversation. Yeah. Finished his sentences. It's taking too long.
Yeah. So they talked about the 60 Minutes clip, the 60 Minutes, CBS 60 Minutes interview Kamala did, and what a sort of softball thing it was. and that how they edited her answers to sound coherent. When you watch the unedited thing, it just wasn't. And Trump described that as election interference and fraud. That's a quote. It's not too far off, really. Yeah. They talked about how the morale of cops in America has been destroyed over the last 4 years. Like the defund police thing is completely insane. Of course, that's the opposite of what a normal society would do. And they talked all about tariffs. Trump talking about how maybe he might abolish or massively lower just income tax in general and raise tariffs on all sorts of things. Like, for example, put 100% or 200% tariff on Chinese manufactured cars, for example. If you want a car in America that's manufactured in China, yeah, it's going to cost you through the nose. So you're probably not going to do it. You're going to buy American. And that he talked about McKinley, who's the king of tariffs. Again, where he said, we had a horrible tax policy, I made it great. Just a classic Trump idiom, right? All of tax was bad and I made it great.
I would like to say that a lot of the things he said on the economy, I was pleasantly surprised at how good he was on that. I was just like, I agree with everything he said.
Yeah, right.
It's really good stuff. And the fact that he was just like, yeah, I'm thinking about getting rid of income tax in its entirety and replacing it with tariffs. Sounds good.
He's a businessman and an entrepreneur and a sort of a building guy for most of his life, right? So he's actually lived out what it means to be an entrepreneur. Right? He's actually lived it out. I mean, when they talked about environmentalism, he said how it's just all the red tape and all the endless environmentalist things that hoops you have to jump through makes it incredibly difficult to get things built. I mean, like Elon was saying, we might be illegal to build the infrastructure to go to Mars and the moon soon, if the lefties had their way.
I have a question because I didn't see all of it, particularly the economics bit. Slash in income tax is music to my ears, but did he say much about printing money?
No.
Because you could say that printing money is an indirect income tax. Yeah. Did he address this or not?
No. Towards the end, they talked a bit very briefly about the deficit.
Yes.
Trump was saying he had brought it down a bit and now it's gone crazy again. But he didn't actually talk about quantitative easing or the Fed printing crazy amounts of money, no.
Because the US debt is going to be one of the major problems of his presidency if he gets elected. So.
Well, if anything causes a systems collapse across the whole world, or certainly the West, I believe it will come out of America's deficit and debt issues. I don't think I'm going out on a limb there. I think anyone who knows what they're talking about would probably agree with that. Talking about, they briefly talked about homelessness and when Gavin Newsom cleared up San Francisco for a few days when, was it Xi Jinping came over or something?
That's right, yeah.
And then let it all go back to pot again straight away afterwards. Joe Rogan even mentioned that crap map. Do you remember? We've covered it.
Yeah,
I think Callum covered it. Joe Rogan mentioned that, which was quite funny. They talked about how dystopian modern windmills are, and that nuclear may well be the answer to a lot of the...
Well, Trump was a bit hesitant to say that, wasn't he? He was I think what he was trying to err on the side of is oil and gas and coal.
Drill, baby, drill.
Mm-hmm.
He's very into fracking and drilling.
Yeah.
America's got... the United States has got massive oil reserves. Massive. Canada has also got gigantic oil reserves. They don't need to be importing crazy amounts of oil from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or anything. They briefly talked about the assassination and that Trump's ear, there's not a massive chunk missing from his ear or anything, which is interesting. But Trump said, quote, "It makes me a tougher guy." Which is sort of true, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of undeniable.
Good way to talk about an assassination attempt.
Yeah. They talked about how...
Gives him street cred.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was saying, yeah.
That's why he's surging with the black voters, isn't it? It's like, he's literally me. Yeah. He's been shot.
He's taken a cap. They talked about Kamala and that, in Trump's opinion, Trump's humble. She's just dumb. She's just got really low IQ. He said, "There's something missing. There's something off with her." And later he called her an imbecile. Again, reasonable take. Perfectly reasonable take as far as I can tell.
Anyone who listens to her for 5 minutes can tell that. Yeah.
Talked a bit about the military and, you know, what a travesty pulling out of Afghanistan, or the way they pulled out of Afghanistan was, leaving billions of dollars worth of materiel there. Just a complete travesty. Trump called the generals that did that stupid fools, arrogant fools. When he went to Afghanistan, he got down to business right away and done deals with some of the Afghan warlords there. And he said that if Biden had gone there, he just would have taken a nap and then left without having a meeting with the senior brass. I thought that was funny. Again, Trump, you can accuse him of being guilty of hyperbole sometimes. I think he just said, I rebuilt the military.
Yeah, I don't think that was quite the case.
To an extent, sure, but I mean, anyway. It was hilarious when Joe mentioned the time he talked to the leader of North Korea. And Trump recounts that he said to him, yeah, sure, you've got a big red button, i.e. you can launch nukes. But so have I, and my button's bigger. And he said, little rocket man, you're going to burn in hell. That's hilarious to me.
Was that to his face? I sort of
I think it was over the phone, I think.
Okay.
But it might have been to his face. It may have been to his face, actually.
There was
Either way, that's brilliant and hilarious, and
it clearly worked, didn't it?
Right. Well, that's the point. Yeah, that's the point. It's not just funny for the sake of it. It worked, though.
There was a tweet that he sent to Kim Jong-un. I remember, but it was an infamous tweet, and he was saying basically that, we're gonna bring you fire like you've never seen before, something like that.
Yeah. It's a classic thing going back to the Cold War. Going to turn you back to the Stone Age. We're just going to bounce rubble, drop nukes on an already nuclear wasteland.
I mean, North Korea's not too far off the Stone Age anyway.
But little rocket man, you're going to burn in hell. Okay, talks a little bit about the enemy within, which, that's one of the things that his political opponents accuse him of being, both the Austrian painter man, but also Mussolini and Stalin, all of these things all at once, because he mentioned the enemy within. Although it just simply is the case, like us, have been flooded by foreign people that are quite often criminals. He talked about how some foreign countries in Central or Southern America have emptied their jails and sent them over there. Seems to be a statement of fact.
Yeah, of course it is.
He's described Springfield, Ohio as a horror show. A population in the 50,000s dropped 30-odd thousand foreign people into their community.
Haitians.
And mainly Haitians, yeah. Or that Aurora, Colorado has been sort of overtaken by MS-13. Mentioned the immigrant app, where there's like an actual app where you can go on and just the insanity list goes on and on and on. They talked about RFK, which I thought was interesting, because I've heard RFK on a number of policy points, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that. I know he's a darling of all sorts of people, even some centre-rightist people like RFK. I think on a lot of things I just don't agree with his worldview, but he's now in the Trump camp, and on some things he's good. Like on Big Pharma, RFK's great, right? So Trump said, I'll keep him away from environmentalist stuff, but let him go crazy on the Big Pharma stuff. It's great. They used to have, back in the 19th century, Britain would have a thing called a government of all the greatest talents, a government of the talents. So you would have ministers from the other parties. We just don't really do that nowadays. It's not really done, hardly ever.
Bipartisanship.
Yeah, true bipartisan. So there's someone from the other party that's actually an expert on health or something. And you have them as your health minister. You don't care that they're from the other party. So if Trump does put RFK in government, that would be extremely interesting and very rare, very rare. It used to happen a lot more in centuries past. We don't really do it anymore.
Was this also not the case during the Cold War in the US? You would have
occasionally
you would have people from both parties.
Occasionally you would do it, yeah. But yeah, you don't really see it much anymore. Mentioned Hillary. Trump said he saved her from jail. He could have put her in jail. He called Comey a stupid son of a bitch. Called him a hog. If anyone remembers Comey. I would go further than that myself. They talk about how Tim Walz is just a complete disaster zone, which he is. Joe Rogan at one point asked him why is America and being flooded by criminal immigrants, and Trump said, well, it's because they hate our country, or that there's just that, and then it's either that they're stupid or that they're just trying to buy votes. And it's got to be one of those things. And I'd agree with that. I mean, I would say it's not because they're stupid. It's very deliberate. It's very cynical, in my opinion. It seems absolutely clear.
No, absolutely.
Again, working towards some sort of anarcho-tyranny or just ruining the fabric of our societies. And then the last few bits, which I thought were interesting and worthy of note, is where Joe asked him about JFK, the JFK files. And Trump said that almost immediately upon entering office, he would open up all the remaining unopened JFK files. Trump said, it's time, it's a cleansing thing. So I've got my fingers crossed for that. I suspect from everything I know and have read, anything truly, truly damning has already been, quote unquote, lost. And so there isn't actually all that much left to reveal. But who knows? I could be completely wrong about that. That could age very, very badly. And Trump could reveal more files and it just says, yes, Alan Dulles ordered this. And Jim Angleton got the team together, the CIA guys. It might be that. I don't know. But I'll be very, very interested to see what is left to actually release. I think a lot of the stuff was burnt a long time ago, documents and things, or lost, quote unquote. So we'll see. But if Trump does that, he was a tiny bit cagey about it, because Joe asked him, what have you seen? As president, you're allowed to see it. And we knew back in 2016, you saw some documents which the rest of the world haven't seen. What have you seen? Tell us. And Trump was a bit like, well, you know, he was a bit cagey. Mm-hmm. But again, if it is truly national security, he said there's still people alive that it could affect. Yeah.
That's kind of the point.
Right, yeah. So we'll see about that. And the other thing, second penultimate thing I want to mention is that Joe asked him about aliens. Are there aliens? He brought up, you know, Commander Favorer and the Tic Tac and stuff. And Trump said, yeah, there's no reason not to think that there's something out there. Trump said himself when he was in office, he spoke to quite a few military commanders, like radar guys or pilots, that told him all sorts of stories of, there's just like sphere-shaped
I've
things
covered it
out there
before on the website. I tried to get Carl to believe it, and he wouldn't believe it. I tried to basically pin him down like in Clockwork Orange and open his eyes and say, look, it's happening.
Trump said, and this is a quote, there's something there. Yeah, there seems to be something there, yeah. I don't think Commander Favorer is making things up whole cloth, so... yeah, there's something.
It's not only Commander Fravor, but a fair few other people as well that were senior and also lost out in their careers. You know, coming out and saying it kind of ruined their lives to a certain extent. So there's no incentive for them to lie about it. Quite the opposite.
Well, I think NASA and the CIA and other intelligence services have gone before Congress and said, look, there's all these unanswered questions and we don't know the answer to it. This is recently, in the last couple of years, that has been. Actual, was it the Congress or Senate? Either way, sort of open hearing.
The Senate.
Open hearings talking about it, saying there's all sorts of unidentified things flying around our airspace and low Earth orbit, and we, the US Air Force, NASA, CIA, we don't know what they are. It's not us, and we don't know what it is. So that's again, that's just a matter of record, right? So anyway, it's interesting. Okay, so there's one other issue I do want to talk about. And that was the nature of the 2020 election. But at this point, we're going to stop putting what we're talking about here on YouTube, because we just can't talk about it. So if you're watching this on YouTube, the segment will end now-ish. And if you want to know what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, you'll either have to go over to Rumble or something like that, or Odyssey. We're on Odyssey.
Or on our website.
Or on our website, lotuseaters.com. Go over there where you can see us talk about the next thing.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Bo's series, Epochs. This time he's talking about Pompey and Caesar. I love the ancient history stuff. And if you want to see all the other things that we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter, where we post links. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.